So Sian Lim, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, they're going to hold, are they? Is that your view too?
Hi, Rishaad. Good morning. Yes, that's our house view as well. Essentially, you know, as with most of the Asian countries, I think Indonesia is not seriously looking at a crisis-type scenario right now. At the same time, inflationary pressures, while having ebbed, are still not quite fully at comfortable levels yet. So yes, Bank Indonesia is likely to hold.
Okay, well, you know, how would you characterize what's going on with the Indonesian economy at the moment?
Again, I think as with regional trends, you know, you do see signs of moderating activity. You know, on the domestic side, you see some of the indicators starting to tail off. But I would stress that for instance, consumer confidence, while kind of flattening out, is still at very strong levels. You know, and likewise for several of the other indicators. So of course, a little bit more pronounced. We're starting to see a little bit more pronounced weakness on the external side. But by and large, you know, nothing I think of the sort of the economic scenario that the markets seem to be pricing in.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, if we look at the Indonesian economy, it is insulated more so than some of the other regional neighbours, given that it does have a strong consumption element, a domestic consumption element to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 90% of the economy is domestic demand, which is you know, consumption and investment. Relative to some of the other markets in the region, I mean, the extreme example with Singapore, for instance, it's very much insulated. You know, in the you know what, in the event of a crisis type scenario, which we are not yet factoring in at the moment, in the event of that kind of scenario, I mean, if we recall what happened during Lehman, Indonesia did extremely well, along with China and India.
I mean, we just got an answer saying that the IMF says that these economies in Southeast Asia are set to accelerate. I mean, do you buy into that, or do you see some of this weakness still making itself felt if we do see, well, a downturn in the US or this continued slow growth story?
I think for Asia, what we are potentially looking at now is something a little worse than, say, 6 months ago, when we were probably looking more at a cyclical type moderation, you know, having come off from very strong levels of growth in 2010. So acceleration would not really be the word I'd use to describe, you know, the outlook for Asia next year, or you know, even for the next 6 months. But as I said before, a recession type scenario, a crisis type scenario is I think still a while away, and we still have not got that pencil into our numbers yet.
Yeah, I mean, which economy would you say is most vulnerable there in that part of the world? I
mean, again, using Lehman as a benchmark, you know, on the one hand, you've got your very strong domestically driven economies, as I said, Indonesia, along with China and India. Throughout Lehman, you know, the economies basically just paused, and then from there had a very strong recovery. And then on the extreme side of the scale, you've got your very export-oriented Singapore, you know, Taiwan, Korea. But if we look back at what happened in 08, and thereafter, what we saw was that these so-called most vulnerable economies were then also the ones that recovered the most. You know, Singapore, 14% GDP growth in 2010. I think that's quite hard to beat.